All right. Hey everybody, thanks so much for clicking on this. I'm going to talk about my top 10 D&D movies. Now, I'm working on something big. I'm working on something a little more serious, and I just wanted to kind of decompress and make something fun. This is not silly, but it's a good time. Now, I'm not going to talk about my top 10 movies. This is not me sharing my letterboxd with you. This is me talking about movies that I think represent Dungeons and Dragons, the feel, the vibe, the elements of it. Now, what's not on this list are the actual Dungeons and Dragons movies. I think that would be cheating. I want to get weird with it. But for the record, I think that Honor Among Thieves is a really good time. And if you are talking to a friend who's never played D&D and you want to get them to play D&D, I think sitting down with them and watching this movie and having a good laugh is going to be a perfect introduction to what they're about to get into. Now, on the other hand, the 2000 Dungeons and Dragons movie is a bad film, but it is like the Troll 2 of Dungeons and Dragons movies. You can sit down with your gaming group and watch this if you haven't already. Have a few drinks. I promise you, you will have a blast laughing at this movie. It's a really good time. Now, what I'm also not talking about in this video are the Lord of the Rings films. I think everyone who hasn't played D&D kind of gets that Lord of the Rings and D&D are very closely related. But these top three movies are so good that they kind of become their own thing. They transcend D&D reality. So if I was ranking this, top 10 best D&D movies, this would be spots 1, 2, and 3. And then, we've also got the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, which is good in its own way. We've got the old, stoner art Hobbit movie, and that's fun. And then the newer Hobbit movies, which people have opinions on. I like the first two. The third movie is a little, well, more than a little off the rails. It's like a dungeon master that has lost their way and the players don't care anymore, but it's still kind of a D&D movie. But we're not going to get into that. I'm also not going to explain my criteria for exactly what a D&D movie is. I'm just going to kind of show you. Now, I considered 50 movies D&D films. And then from those 50 movies, I narrowed it down to a list of a top 20 because, we D&D players, we like the number 20. But I didn't feel as strongly about some of those as I did my top 10. But I did want to mention one film that just barely didn't make the cut, and that is Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai, clearly one of the best pieces of cinema ever made, very influential. And one of its big things is it's kind of the GOAT of team-up movies. And in Dungeons and Dragons, most of the time, you're going to be teaming up with your party before you go out on your quest. And that's what you get in Seven Samurai. Very good movie. Now, as far as sitting down and having a movie night with your D&D pals, I think it would be a rough sell to say, let's watch a 3-hour black and white subtitled movie and have some beer and popcorn. So if that one is a little rough, I think you could have a good time maybe showing them the newer Magnificent Seven movie with Denzel and Chris Pratt. Is it as good a movie as Seven Samurai? No, not many things are, but I think it's a good time, and I think it does kind of capture the D&D spirit. With all that out of the way, let's get to my real top 10 list, and in spot number 10, I have Army of Darkness. Yeah, so we have our main character, Ash, who gets sent back to a medieval setting, which quickly becomes about a lot of dark fantasy and horror vibes coming into play. And this movie is just fun. It hits the right balance between horror and danger and comedy that I think you'll find in a lot of D&D games, whether you're old school or the new age. Really good time. Now, what this is missing is that team-up aspect. It is kind of all about Ash and what he can do as our bumbling hero. but it is still my number 10 spot. Let's see what I consider better than that. Number 9, I have a little movie called Ironclad. I'm going to have a lot of movies on this list that are like big Hollywood productions, movies you've heard of and have probably seen. I wanted one good B movie on here, and for me that's Ironclad. Now Ironclad is a medieval movie. It has no fantasy, no magical elements, but some people, they really like a low magic or even no magic D&D game. And I think if you want that more gritty, realistic feel, then Ironclad is a solid example of that. You got your team. You know, we definitely have a paladin here. There's a barbarian. We got a ranger and a rogue in the mix. They have to defend a castle in a siege from evil Paul Giamatti as the bad king. And there's actually an interesting historical element in this. It's based on a true story of the fallout of Magna Carta, and it's kind of interesting to look into. But if you sit down with your D&D pals and you watch Ironclad, I think you're going to have a good time. Is it the best movie on this list? No, not by a long shot. But is it a D&D movie? Yeah, totally. Number 8. Star Wars is a D&D movie. Yeah, you assemble your team of heroes. We got a bugbear over here. We got a couple warforged. We of course have our old space wizard, our dashing rogue, and our heroic farm boy who wants to become an eldritch knight. And then we got a princess to save. She can fight too. She gets in on the mix. We got our evil space wizard. The Death Star is a dungeon. They got to go through, they got to infiltrate and lie their way through things, use some disguises, run through the hallways. We get a big on-screen dungeon trap with the trash compactor. That's awesome. That's totally D&D. Now, Star Wars is a great film. I think it's a wonderful D&D movie. However, Act 1 is kind of Luke's farm boy backstory, and that's not really what D&D is about. D&D is about more of the Act 2, you know, the gang's together, we're going on an adventure, we're going in the dungeon, we're saving the world. And then when you get to Act 3, it's, you know, it turns into a World War II fighter pilot movie, and that's fine. That one's harder to replicate in D&D, but you could do it totally. I still think Star Wars is a great D&D movie. Somebody could make the argument to me that the real Star Wars D&D movie is Rogue One, and that would be okay. But for me, my pick is the OG. Number 7. Here is my dark horse pick. I don't think you've seen this movie, but if you're like me and you saw this in a $3 DVD bargain bin and said, I can give that a shot for $3, I think you'll have a surprisingly good time with it. The visuals on this movie are quite good. The action is fun, and while it wasn't on any of the marketing for the movie, they are fighting monsters. It's not like Chinese versus Mongols on the Great Wall. It is these folks versus a bunch of freaky alien monsters, and it's really cool and really fun. Now, you might not be able to get over the white savior aspect of this film, and I'm not really going to argue about that or defend that. I will say that as you watch the movie and it goes on, it really becomes more about the chick's story, and she's great. Matt Damon is more there to help her out, and for some reason we also have Pedro Pascal and Willem Dafoe, but you know, they're fun. I think this is a really good movie, or I should change that. It's not a really good movie, but it's a good D&D movie, and I think your D&D pals will have a good time watching it and probably poking a little fun at it too. Number 6. Castle in the Sky. I knew when I made this list I was going to have a Miyazaki movie on here, and for the longest time this spot belonged to Princess Mononoke. And there can be others in this spot. I think Spirited Away or Nausicaa has some D&D vibes going on, some definite fantasy aspects. But Castle in the Sky I've seen more recently with my girlfriend, and I think it's just a good time. I think it captures the feel of an adventure. And this is kind of a more family-friendly spot than some of the other movies that I have. Not only is it a good time, but you've got awesome things like the sky pirates. By the time you actually get to Laputa, it is a dungeon. There's puzzles and traps and dangers. You've got the sad robot character that is really cool. You've got interesting villains and side characters. I think Castle in the Sky is a really good time, and I think it's a really good D&D movie. Number 5. I have another anime movie on here, and it is very different and not a family-friendly good time. If you want something R-rated with nudity and violence and lots of blood, go for Ninja Scroll. I'm not sure how much of a niche pick this is. I know amongst the circle of like anime bros, which I guess I am because I have my Berserk volumes back here. I think Ninja Scroll is known in that circle and well regarded. But I think for the average moviegoer or even the average anime fan, you might not know that this exists. I think this is an awesome movie. I also think it is very D&D. You've got a ton of enemies who use different magical powers and different fighting styles. The main character is great. He gets this snaky poison assassin lady to help him out at one point, and that's fun. So we do have a party element going on. Yeah, it's just an awesome movie. Enough said. Moving on to my number 4 pick. I got Pirates of the Caribbean. Now the whole franchise could be on here, but for me it's gonna be the first film, The Curse of the Black Pearl. We definitely have a D&D party getting together. Now pretty much everybody is a swashbuckler rogue. There's not a lot of party composition diversity here, but that's fine. Sometimes you play in a D&D game where it's a pirate game and everybody's a pirate, and that's cool. We do have magical elements. You know, there's freaky skeleton pirates. When you get on later in the series, you get stuff like the Kraken and Calypso. Great villain, by the way. Absolutely great villain. You've got lots of different factions that are going for treasure and stuff, so you get kind of an intrigue element going on. I think this is just a wonderful action adventure movie. It does have the comedic elements that you often get in a D&D game too. Just a fun time that probably a lot of people have seen. That if they're like, what's D&D like? I think you could say it's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, but you know, a little more medieval fantasy times, and then be like, oh, okay, that makes some sense. Number 3, I have The Mummy. Yeah, another perfect adventure film. This one has a little more of a horror element to it. The mummy and the plagues in this movie are kind of scary sometimes, but that's counteracted by a really good cast of heroes that make perfect sense in the D&D world. This one really gets into a lot of dungeons, and there's lots of little fights. There's traps. The curse with the MacGuffin book is a very D&D staple kind of thing. I don't have as much to say about this movie because it's just solidly good. I think everybody knows about this movie, and I think it's a wonderful D&D time. So, number 2, Big Trouble in Little China. For many, many years, this was my go-to for a D&D movie. Until I saw number 1, and we'll get to that. But, you know, we've got our bumbling hero who... you know, forms his own little party. They definitely go into a dungeon. They're fighting Lopan, who is basically a lich. There's some other monsters. I think at one point there is actually a beholder that pops up, and that's funny. You've got awesome fights. You've got a cast of villains that use different magical powers. There's magic items. There's certainly a comedic side to everything. Big Trouble in Little China is absolutely a D&D movie in a more modern setting, but give everybody a sword and it works out great. But it's not my number 1. The number 1 spot goes to The Suicide Squad. Now, there's a lot of superhero movies that have D&D vibes. I think Avengers is up there. I think Guardians of the Galaxy is basically a Spelljammer campaign, straight up. But if I had to pick one superhero movie and one James Gunn superhero movie, it's going to be The Suicide Squad. And that is because I watched this with a D&D crew before, and every scene somebody was pointing at the screen and being like, that's like our D&D party. That happened last week. I could totally see that happening. Yeah, this film is great. Is it the best film in the world? No, but is it the best D&D movie? For me, yeah. For you, it might be something different, and I would love to hear about it in the comments. Just again, don't take this too seriously. I'm just one guy on the internet sharing some fun movies that I think have D&D vibes. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a nat 20 day. Bye-bye.